in low volume and what they are sold tend to be a little bit fallout from the manufacturers. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And at this point, we were buying batteries, we're buying between 50 to 100 packs at a time. And with that volume interest, we could entertain. So the company that we're getting our nickel metal hydride batteries from, they were a pretty big name in the battery business that supplied a lot of the brand name electric bicycles being sold in Europe at the time. So we had a bit more faith in their ability to deliver a good QC. But we were never able to get Japanese cells. Like we couldn't get Panasonic or Sanyo because we weren't able to purchase in a volume that would interest them. And that's, at the end of the day, that's a big lesson that I learned from all this. There's the difference between a factory that can make a cell that's 99% good versus 99.999 is several orders of magnitude of experience and size and R&D research team, and that's who you have to go to you're not running into.
Considering the agony you've had you considered buying individual cells, binning them yourselves, and assembling your own packs?
We almost got to the point of buying a tab welder to do that. But I realized the scope of actually having to test thousands and thousands of cells, and I would have most likely tried to spec them pre-bin for me, and then we would just assemble them. And the other thing is that when they build those packs, they test on the DRM right after manufacturing. I'm sure every battery tests out fine, but something happens from when the pack gets assembled in China to when it gets transported onto a boat, travels for 4 months in the ocean, goes through customs clearance, sits on our shelf for a few weeks before we get to test it, where variations show up that aren't apparent right off the factory line. So I would think that if they had done an aging process where they then bin the cells and then let them sit for a few months and then see if they still are within that same bin, they might have had a lot more reshuffling of which cells go with which. But yeah, here's an example of a battery pack that lasted 6 months. It went from 8 amp hours. It tested fine originally, and then when the customer brings it back in, it's got a host of cells that are all cutting out after 5.5 amp hours, and got nowhere near the 500 charge and discharge cycles that a manufacturer will usually claim. This is another case. This is a nickel metal hydride battery pack where in our initial testing there's a few reversals, but then by the time all the cells are balanced, it really does give us quite a beautiful discharge curve, just over the 12 amp hours that it's supposed to. And then 18 months later, it's got, so some of these cases the chart, like for whatever reason the chargers didn't fully charge it up, but these are the curves that kind of matter. And it's down to having reversals at 7, 8 amp hours, which again is nowhere near the 500 or 600 cycles that we would have hoped to come from the battery. And so one of the things that we suspected is that, as implied earlier, if you have that one cell that reverses and your discharge beam is at 20 amps, and that cell gets permanently affected and will very rapidly decline in its performance. And so we took some batteries that weren't testing out very well to begin with and automated one of our test apparatuses to just charge and discharge it day in, day out for quite a few months. And then every 25th or every 50th discharge, we plotted the graph here. So this is the original one after 50 cycles, 100, 150, etc. And you can see that these cells, the bad cells, get worse very quickly, and then they just completely sort out altogether. And then you can see this progression of cells very rapidly. It's funny, it's hard to, it'd be neat to identify if this cell here, the same cell that's reversing there, is that one there, is that one there. We don't actually have cell-by-cell identification, but it did confirm that after, if you take a battery that initially has reversals and deeply discharge it, within 100 cycles later, the battery is completely gone. And another question we kept getting with nickel-based batteries is, well, do these have the memory effect? How do I avoid the memory effect? What does memory mean to me? It bothered me in some sense because it had such an enormous familiarity to everybody, but everybody assumed that it meant if you just partly drain the battery a few times, and that's all you can get out of the battery pack. So the memory effect really means that if you partly discharge the battery quite a few times, the battery kind of remembers that endpoint, but it doesn't suddenly stop giving you output. If you then try to continue to discharge, it will give you the original capacity. It's just that at a lower voltage than it had before. So this, what we did is we took a battery pack, we partly discharged it to 4 amp hours 12 times in a row, and then we fully discharged it. And the full discharge is this blue line. So at the 4 amp hour point, you can see that it actually looks like it's sort of going flat. But then no, it recovers just fine and gives us the 8 amp hours it was supposed to. We then recharge the battery, and on the next discharge cycle, there's no hint at all of anything happening at 4 amp hours. So there is a memory, but the memory lasts all of one cycle, and there's no consequence really to you as a battery user. And why it became so present in our understanding batteries is because all the newer chemistries are always marked as being memory-free, and they were using this fairly esoteric phenomenon of NICADs as a way of selling other chemistries. Anyway, so back to the bashing. So Nextel was the company that was supplying our nickel metal hydride batteries, and they were used in a lot of OEM electric bike builders. And for the most part, like you saw that guy who lasted for 3 years with that 8 amp hour battery that had the crack in it. When they worked superbly well. Then we had one shipment that was delayed. When we asked why it was delayed, they said, oh, like a large number of the cells didn't actually pass QC, and they couldn't actually make the full batch that we had ordered, so they gave us just a subset. They said they didn't have enough cells to make our complete order. So that should have raised a few flags. The shipment came in, and when we tested them, the ones we tested immediately seemed okay, but then we have a bunch of batteries. We don't test them all at once, we test them as we need. So like a month later, 2 months later, we started testing these batteries, and then they would test out really crappy. So what was supposed to be a 12 amp hour battery pack, if we had tested this right when the shipment arrived, we would have gotten about 10.5 or 11 amp hours from the ones that we did test them. This one sat on the shelf for 5 months before we tested it, and in its first cycles, it's giving like 5.5, 6 amp hours. And as we continue to cycle it, we see it improve, which is good. And some of the cells improve all the way up to 9 amp hours, but it never gets even close to 12 amp hours, just for sitting on a shelf for 5 months. Whereas in a previous shipment, we had some that were on the shelf for 8 months to a year that never showed that kind of behavior. And this affected pretty much the entire batch, and that was the final straw with us dealing with nickel metal hydride battery. And then that same battery sat on the shelf for another year because we didn't know what to do with it, and now it's just barely good 7 amp hours after repeated cycles. And then, yeah, here's showing one from the same batch just immediately after the shipment arrived. So unfortunately, this meant that some of these batteries we tested right after the shipment came in, and then supplied them to customers, and then our previous history with Nextel had been really good, and so we told, oh yeah, you can expect 2 years of regular use, and you'll notice that there was internal resistance as well, but you still get your range and capacity. With this particular batch, that wasn't the case, and when customer had it,